Hello folks, J. Scott Phillips here, and today we are bound for part 2 of a little endeavor of mine that I'm calling Frost Giant Fridays. And that's where I'm going to take the opportunity here to try to create little weekly episodes following different slices of the history and the background and the artwork of Robert E. Howard's second ever written Conan adventure, The Frost Giant's Daughter. Now, it's a very short story. If you've ever read it, you know that in most editions that you can find it in, it's going to be 9 or 10 pages or less and probably take you 10 minutes to read. So you might wonder, well, if it's that short of a story, why are you taking so many installments to look it over? And it's the artwork. I originally intended to do this as a single video a couple of months ago for Sumerian September. And I would look at how Robert E. Howard came to write the story, how he tried to get it published within his lifetime, and then march through the decades here at all the great artwork that this one little story has generated or inspired. So like I say, there's no way I could do a single video of that. So I decided I'll take a little more time here, do a deeper dive, which is really pretty deep now. I'm gonna have to come up and be decompressed, I think. But part 1 went up last Friday, and it covered the early years of the story when Howard wrote the story, tried to get it published, a couple of attempts at that, on up through it finally resurfacing after Howard's death and being published but edited heavily, and then on up to having to end with some artwork here. Probably the first and most iconic expression of the Frost Giant's Daughter by the great Frank Frazetta, which was first published in 1969 for the Lancer and Ace paperback books, and then has been reproduced many times ever since. A great illustration. That ended part 1. Part 2 now here, we're going to talk about the Barry Windsor-Smith, Roy Thomas Marvel Comics adaptation, and then parts 3 and 4, Crom willing, will cover the eventual publication of Howard's unedited story, the way he meant The Frost Giant's Daughter to be read, and then get into subsequent comic book adaptations, Ablaze, Titan, and Dark Horse editions on down the line. See how far we get. So let's. I talked a little bit about Robert E. Howard and his background in part 1. In this one, since we're focusing on the Roy Thomas Barry Windsor-Smith Marvel Comics edition here, let's look a little bit at the background of Barry Windsor-Smith. Barry Windsor-Smith is primarily known as a British comic book artist and illustrator. And I say British because he was born in London in 1949, but his comic book art is generally thought to be American from starting out in Marvel Comics. But as a kid, he started to teach himself how to draw by copying Wally Wood illustrations out of Mad Magazine. And he also would try to copy and emulate the sketches by Leonardo da Vinci. His formal art education earned him a degree in illustration from East Ham Technical College in London. And then he got his professional start doing work for British comic book companies Fantastic and Terrific. And most of their material was just reprinting Marvel comics from America. And as such, these British comics ran an artwork series called Powerhouse Pinups, which were one-page kind of poster drawings of Marvel comic characters. And Smith drew a bunch of those in a sort of a fan art style of Jack Kirby. And I think you can tell by looking at these examples here that they were not the best comic book art. They look to me to be primarily copied verbatim from Jack Kirby artwork, or mimicked as a fan artist might do in trying to learn to draw in a certain style. But with samples like those pinups in his portfolio, he managed to arrange for an interview with Stan Lee at Marvel Comics. And in 1968, when Smith was only 19 years old, he flew to New York to meet with Stan Lee. And he probably had other things in his portfolio other than just those pinups. But as a former fledgling illustrator myself, I can tell you he definitely would have included those professionally published Marvel comic characters in his portfolio with an interview with Stan Lee. But based on his Kirby-esque style, Stan Lee decided that let's give the kid a shot here, and so he assigned Barry Smith to illustrate X-Men number 53, which was about to go into production. Now, Stan Lee gave Smith quite a nice little project here as his first commission for Marvel Comics. Not only did Lee give Smith the cover illustration to create for X-Men number 53, but also had him draw the cover story for that issue. And so here we see Smith's first commission Marvel cover and then a sample of his interior story art with inks by Mike Esposito. And this was from X-Men number 53, cover dated February of 1969, but it actually hit the newsstands on December 12th, 1968. I was not a fan of Barry Smith's artwork when I first saw it. It looked to me like a cheap imitation of Jack Kirby. But the cover here, as you can see, was not that bad. I think at the time I probably thought it was a Kirby cover without looking too closely. But I've also included that sample page from the story itself just to show what Smith was up to inside the book. And I chose this page for a particular reason. Not only was it pretty typical of how well Smith was able to carry off the project or not, but it was a full-page drawing of a pretty girl. And this page, for me, just was not cutting it. It looked okay in general to me, you know, pretty nice legs here on this pretty girl, but what was going on with those feet and those ankles? They're just kind of turning into little spindly things here. This was definitely not a Buscema girl, so I was just disappointed in this new artist. But to be fair to Smith in those days, this X-Men number 53 was not the only thing that Stan was handing off to him to do. So Smith was having to work pretty quickly because he was also getting commissioned several other Marvel comic book covers. And let's just take a look at his first couple of months worth of covers that he was cranking out. As you can see here, just within his first 2 months of doing work for Marvel Comics, this is a lot of covers for one artist to be cranking out, especially at that age here. So other than that first X-Men number 53, Smith was not doing interior interior story art. But I have to say, for a kid who was only 19 at the time, getting to do this kind of artwork for Marvel Comics, and at that time, that just must have been a blast. He was probably having just the greatest time and thought he was on his way. Now, like I say, I wasn't really impressed with Barry Smith at first, and so I wasn't really following him like I did Jack Kirby and John Buscema, Gene Colan, and some others. Barry Smith wasn't really on my radar as I was reading Marvel Comics at the time. But he was doing a lot of covers, and over the next several months, he got a handful of interior stories. I remember one particular Avengers issue that featured Ultron, and some of the panels in there were just, to my eye, very disappointing, almost cringeworthy. I did not want to see Barry Smith coming back for as the illustrator for my Avengers comic. He could stay on some of the other comics that I didn't read so much. He could fill in for Herb Trimpe, for instance, if he wanted to. But be that as it may, Smith was learning a lot, and quickly. It was only a year and a half after that X-Men number 53 that he started with that Conan the Barbarian number 1 came out, and Smith became the premier artist for Conan for Marvel. And so let's take a look at a comparison between that first X-Men number 53 cover and then a year and a half later that Conan the Barbarian issue number 1, which was cover dated October 1970, but actually came out in July. But as much progress as we can see here, Smith, I don't think, was still at the top of his game, but he was coming along with great strides, I think. His blocking was still kind of Jack Kirby, but a lot of his human curves, and in particular his legs that he would draw, always looked more Steranko-like to me, Jim Steranko. He's often compared to being a combination of Kirby and Steranko in those early days anyway, and you can kind of see it here, I think. But mostly he was refining and defining the shapes and details of not just the figures, but also of the background. And he was experimenting more and more with his own inking style. And I think there was still some stiffness in his drawing, but it was just that detail and the care that he was taking. He took time to perfect his drawings as much as he could, I think, and that just took more time. So that slowed him down to a great degree, but it really was showing improvement in his overall style. And I think he was really maturing as a professional comic book artist now. He was 21 now, and he had been working under the influences of John Buscema, John Romita, Jack Kirby, Marvel Comics, Gene Colan, just that whole world there, and as much artwork as they were giving him to do, he was really stepping up, I think. And by the time he was doing Conan, he wasn't doing as many other covers or interior stories at all. He was doing almost exclusively Conan, almost from the very start there. And so that gave him the time to really refine the drawings and get everything just as much as he could. Now, speaking of John Buscema, I mentioned him a couple times here. Let's jump forward here now to Barry Smith's Frost Giant's Daughter, as first appeared in Savage Tales #1 in January of 1971 with a great John Buscema painted cover. Now, it was cover dated May 1971, but it actually hit the newsstands in January. Savage Tales was kind of a bold experiment for Marvel in those days. They were trying to publish something that was a little more mature so they could get around some of the Comics Code's restrictions. And so they could do this by publishing Conan and other types of comic book-like artwork in black and white magazines, Savage Tales #1 being the first of these to get around those Comics Code's restrictions, and by putting that for mature audiences, that rated M parental guidance label on the cover. They were trying to make a point with this first issue, how much of a more provocative nature these comics could be than the monthly color comics. So they had John Buscema do this great painting here, not representing the Frost Giant's daughter in particular. I guess you may be able to kind of assume that it might be in a kind of an abstract way, but really I think this is just more of a generic Conan cover, and they really wanted to show that, yes, this is a little more explicit than regular comic books could be. So we're going to have Conan here holding a severed human head. That's something that the Comics Code would kind of frown on. And then the scantily clad woman there and this pile of dead bodies, which we could kind of imply in a lot of the monthly color comics. But this was a great vehicle then for Barry Windsor-Smith to go all out on the artwork for the Frost Giant's Daughter, just because he could draw the Frost Giant's Daughter herself more explicitly than he could get away with in a color comic book. So now we're finally going to get to Barry Smith's artwork for the Frost Giant's Daughter from Savage Tales #1. And in so doing, we're going to be revealing a lot of the story points from this very short story. So if you don't want anything given away, if you've never read the original story by Robert E. Howard, then this is your chance for a spoiler alert here. Put the video on pause, go read it, come back in 10 minutes, and we'll be waiting for you. And then we'll go on from there. All right? See you in a minute. All right, we're all back now, ready to move forward together. But before we do that, I want to mention a couple of things real quick. And one is that in early 1971, when Savage Tales #1 first came out, the story as Robert E. Howard had originally written it, that manuscript, was not yet published. It would not come out in print until 1976. In 1971, the only version that anyone had to go by was the edited version by L. Sprague de Camp. But the good news here, though, is that as annoying as some of us might find de Camp's rewording of the story in a lot of cases, he did not change the story. So even though he moved some words and phrases around for whatever his particular reasons were at the time, just to get his mark on it, I suppose, does not alter the story, so that what Roy Thomas and Barry Smith had to go by, still, as we read this Savage Tales version here, very true to how Robert E. Howard imagined it should be read. So we can move forward with that. And then the second point is that I'm not going to go through the whole story here in the artwork here. I'm just going to focus on 8 beats. There are 8 beats to this story, 8 key points moving through the story that I'm going to focus on for this, and maybe even keep doing that for future videos here just to manage it, because there's a lot of artwork to get through. So with that having been said, now we'll move forward here to the opening spread from Savage Tales #1. Now, when these black and white magazines were first coming out, they were of a larger format than a regular comic book that we were used to. And not only that, there were several pages up front that took up room. That started off with ads and table of contents and other little knickknacks and things up front, so that unlike a regular color comic, it didn't open up to the first page being the opening of the story with that big full color splash panel. Instead, things pushed the story starting further into the magazine, and so we wound up with a double page splash introduction here to the story, which I think was really great. Not only are the pages larger, but the extra wingspan here gave Barry Smith appropriate elbow room, I think, to open the very first story in this mature audience version of a comic book here. And he really put it to good use, I think. Just look at the way he's using the space here. He's starting off on the left half of the spread with that little rhythmic 4-panel introduction here, showing us little views through keyholes of details of the battle that has just been waged. And then that leads the eye naturally to the nameplate over on the right half of the spread with a little intro text up at the top. And then our eye wants to drop down to that first beat of the story that I was talking about. The first beat being the battle between the only 2 survivors of the battle here. Conan of the black hair, who was fighting for the blonde-headed Aesir, and then Heimdall, who was the last survivor of the Vanir. And so that is what we have to see here. Then there's a little scroll behind Conan that gives us the title, The Frost Giant's Daughter by Robert E. Howard. And now here's just a little observation. I don't know that this is true or not, but this makes sense to me. And that is that we see that Roy Thomas has spelled Heimdall differently than we are used to seeing it, being a figure from classic Norse mythology, and also used as a recurring Marvel character in the pages of The Mighty Thor. So I wonder if Thomas wanted to spell it differently here. I don't know why else he would. Just so that readers would not confuse this character with the character from another line of Marvel comics in Thor, just to keep it less confusing. And again, not sure that's the case, but it's just I wonder if kind of a thing. What do you think? And another thing that others have pointed out quite often is that we're battling in the snow here, and yet we see Conan basically naked. He's hardly wearing anything at all. No protection against the elements here at all. He would not last long, aside from the battle, in this kind of environment. However, by the time this was coming out, there had been several issues of the regular color Conan the Barbarian comic, and it was already pretty well established that the character of Conan hardly wore anything at all. I think the most we really saw him wearing was a loincloth and a sunburn, which was about it, and that seemed to get him through any situation wherever he might be. Now we'll move on to the second beat of the story, which is the appearance of Atali, the Frost Giant's daughter herself. And just want to point out that there is a reason for that rated M for mature audiences on the cover of the magazine here. So in case you've got any small children lurking about, might be time to send them to clean up their room or mow the lawn or something, because I'm not going to edit or censor the drawings here at all. It's part of why we're here to have a discussion about the artwork. And if the video happens to be lagging at this point, which I hope it isn't, but in case it is, maybe this kind of thing will start to pull you back in. So let's move on to meet the Frost Giant's daughter. This is not really the very first drawing of the Frost Giant's daughter in Barry Smith's renderings for the story, but it is the one that's most often used to demonstrate or explain just how provocative that these drawings were thought to be at the time they were first published. So I'm going to use it here This takes place immediately after Conan has taken a mighty blow to his helmet during the battle, and after he dispatches Heimdall. And due to that blow on the head, the world seems to shift colors and textures all around, and he feels like he's kind of shifting into another realm of consciousness somehow. And when he looks up, he sees a naked woman, except for this gossamer veil that she's wearing, and she is as white as ivory, and her feet whiter than the snow itself, so Howard is describing her. And at first, when he sees her hair as bright red, which means she's the enemy. She's from the red-headed Vanir, and so he's alert now for a few reasons. And these colors are easy to imagine because we're looking at black and white artwork. And then just a note on production here, and that is that I believe Barry Smith himself did the inking on his artwork for this issue, and it was going to be black and white, so it was not going to be colored, but he wanted to give it some contrast in things other than just the black and white India ink line art. And so back in those days, we used to use this material that we called Zipatone. That was a brand name. There were other brands that made a similar product. But what it was a sheet of halftone dots pre-printed, and you can get them in a variety of tints and shades, larger or smaller line screens, so the dots were bigger or smaller or closer together or further apart to make all these different shades of gray. And then you could cut them out with an X-Acto knife, kind of frisket style, and then it was printed on a transparent material with an adhesive back. So you could then apply that to a pen and ink drawing or any kind of a drawing, really, and you would be able to see the line art through this application that you've just put on there to give it some gray tones and things that you couldn't otherwise do with pen and ink. And I believe that's what Smith is using here, and we'll see other examples of this in further panels that we're going to look at from Savage Tales, because he used it quite a bit and quite effectively for this particular use. But it'll cause problems down the line, but for now, this was, I think, a good idea. The only problem might be here in me zooming in on it is that it might start to create a moire pattern on whatever you're watching it. I hope it doesn't, but if it does, it's just because the dot pattern here is different than the fine dot pattern of your own whatever screen resolution you might be looking at right now. And it might do different things on different screens. I don't know. Hopefully it's not too distracting, but I just want to tell some of the story of the production side of this. Now, the third beat of the story is the chase. Conan has had a rough day up until now, and now he's not even sure of what he's seeing. He's trying to clear his head. He's been beat up pretty badly. He's got various wounds from the battle as the sole survivor, and it's just been a long day. So he sees Atali here, the Frost Giant's daughter, and that she is naked. So he assumes that her village must not be very far away if she's running around dressed like this. I guess it hasn't occurred to him that he also is dressed very similarly. He should be pretty cold anyway, but he's hoping that she can take him to her village where he can rest up, clean up, and get some rest. It's again, he's been through it. But Atali has her own agenda here, and she's going to not only use her feminine attributes here to lure him somewhere, she is also putting a siren call on him because she is, after all, a supernatural being, which Conan does not really understand yet. And not only is Conan enthralled by her beauty, but he's also enraged by her taunting. And so he can't help himself. He's going to give chase. And what is he going to do with her when he catches her is a matter of debate. Now, there has been some discussion that this particular scene, the chase here, was inspired by Greek mythology, the pursuit of Apollo after Daphne. But the agenda was a little different there. In the Apollo and Daphne story, Apollo has been hit by Cupid's arrow of love, and Daphne was hit by an arrow that repels her from Apollo. So they are not on the same page at all, but just for different reasons. And then the whole thing is just kind of retold here by Howard's pen to mix it in with Norse mythology. And now on to the fourth beat of the story, the ambush. And this is where we find out just what Atali is up to. She is leading Conan into a trap where he's going to be confronted by her two frost giant brothers. And the goal here is to slay Conan, cut out his heart, and servant smoking to their father's board. And in this drawing, I think we see a good example of Smith falling back again on his Kirby style. And the layout here is very Kirby-esque, very blocky like that. And then I think we see the one frost giant showing us a little Steranko leg there, but with Smith's own hand at inking it. So it looks a little different, but you can definitely see some of the earlier influences in the layout here. This is a pretty small panel actually on the page that we see it in, but I think that Smith uses the small panel to create that claustrophobic feeling as Conan is getting funneled into this crevasse there where he is probably not likely to make it out alive. And then another note on the production here and those screens that I was talking about. If you're wondering if that's actually true, I think there are some tells in this panel where we see different scales of the dot pattern. And if these were being produced by a copy camera or another photo technique at a single publication, all the line screen, the scale would be the same. And here they are not. And in fact, on the two dark sides of the crevasse there that you can see, that the line screen doesn't even line up from left to right. So they have definitely been cut out and applied by hand. Otherwise, all those dots would line up in the same directions. And then not only that, but those Zipatone sheets came with other patterns other than just halftone dots or different line screens for grayscale. And you can see one of those behind everybody in this panel, the texture that you see in the mountains behind them all. It's got that kind of grainy pattern there. That is not a screen. That is another texture that was available. And those also came in different sizes and tints and shades. But this is the one that Barry Smith, I guess, chose here. And so it gives it yet another layer of something for the eye to chew on. And pretty effective, I think, without the use of color. But things have gotten more interesting by now because Conan did survive and he managed to vanquish his foes here, the two brothers of the Frost Giant's daughter. And now she doesn't have them to protect her anymore. So now Conan is chasing her some more, and now if he catches her, she's really got something to worry about. So she calls on her daddy to rescue her, and Conan did manage to get a hold of her, but she manages to squirm out of his grasp and get free, and that gives her a chance then to call on her father, Ymir, who is the god of all frost giants here, the high potentate here. And then he hears her cry and pulls her back up to his realm where she is no longer in the clutches of Conan. Now, I'm using two panels of artwork here to show beat number 5 because it really is kind of in two steps. I wanted to show her calling out to her father and then her getting beamed up back home where it's safe. Kind of can't show both of those effects in the same panel, but also to show that once again Kirby's style seems to have been left behind by Smith in this case, and the blockings of either of these don't look like really to me either Kirby or Steranko. Again, Smith's own style has been emerging. And now we're getting close to the end with the 6th beat of the story, and it's not as dramatic as any of the other beats so far, but it does represent a turning point in the story. And that is that after Ymir has taken Atali up to his realm, Conan collapses in the snow miles and miles from where the battlefield actually was, and is found by Njord. This is the lost army that was coming to join Conan and his allies at the battle, but got ambushed on the way and didn't get there in time. But they did find everyone dead there, and then followed Conan's footprints off into the wilderness and trailed him for miles and miles. And they asked him, "Why did you run away? If the snow had melted or if it had snowed again, we wouldn't have had your footprints to follow you." And then Conan starts to tell him a story about the Frost Giant's daughter and his battle with her brothers and all that. And they just don't believe him. And so, well, surely if you followed my footprints, you must have found the slain Frost Giants that I killed. And they, well, no, nothing. Well, then you must have seen the footprints of the girl that I was chasing after. No, they had only seen his footprints, and so they just don't believe him. And Conan's starting to think, man, that blow to the head here must have rattled my brain some. I don't, maybe nothing did happen. But there is one guy amongst Njord's troops who is much older and in his youth remembers fighting in a battle where he was one of the last survivors, and he saw himself the frost giant's daughter, and she was beckoning to him to follow, but he was too wounded after the battle to give chase at all, and he's thought of this ever since. So this seems to confirm at least that part of Conan's story, but they still don't believe him until finally the seventh beat. Did I say there were 8 beats to the story? There's only 7. So in the final 7th beat of the story is what I call the reveal. And that is when we see clutched still in Conan's left hand after they found him unconscious in the snow is the last vestige of the wisp of the gossamer veil that was the only garment that Atali was wearing. And he still has it in his hand. So that indicates that, it must have been true. And here's the evidence right here. And now we'll move on to the next part of the video, the last part, where I compare the black and white drawings, the same ones we just looked at here from Savage Tales, to the same drawings as they appeared in the reprint issue of Conan the Barbarian number 16 some years later, where they had to be kind of edited and altered and toned down to be Comics Code Authority compliant, let's just say. But before we do that, I just want to mention one thing. Now that we have seen the reveal from the story where Conan is grasping in his left hand that little wisp of the gossamer veil that proves his story, and compare that to the ending of The Phoenix on the Sword, the very first Conan adventure that Howard wrote. Fundamentally the same ending. So it seems like he's developing a pattern here of using the same literary device to end his story. And that is that in both stories, Conan has either a dream or a vision or some other inexplicable experience that when he tells it to others, they don't believe it. It's just too fantastic of a story until something is produced at the very end that confirms that here's physical evidence. This is from that wild imaginative story that we think he had in his mind. Here's actual physical evidence that it really happened. 2 stories in a row right off the bat with Conan. And so, like I say, I've never heard anyone else mention that. Have you ever thought of that? Has that occurred to you if you're a big Conan fan? And have you heard anyone else talk about that? I don't know what relevance it makes, but it just seems like the first 2 Conan stories out of the box there with the same fundamental ending. Totally different stories, really, and just a different feeling overall. But if you just think about the story device itself, it's identical. So just thought I'd throw that out there. All right, now we'll move on to the color comic edition, Marvel Comics, Conan the Barbarian, issue number 16. Cover dated July, but it really hit the newsstands everywhere in April of 1972, about almost a year after the first appearance in Savage Tales. And to start off with, because this is a comic book now, a reprint, but it has a new cover now because it needs one. The original John Buscema cover from Savage Tales was not strictly a cover depicting the Frost Giant's daughter, so we needed one of those, and it's a good thing, really, because Barry Smith has had almost a full year to continue to develop his style after the Savage Tales version of the Frost Giant's daughter. So he gives us the battle between Conan and the Frost Giant's daughter's brothers. And it's a really nice layout here, just that the action of that angle there and all of that really seems to be breaking away from Kirby-esque or Steranko-like composition, I think. And then he includes the Frost Giant's daughter, which I think is important. Unlike that, although great Frank Frazetta illustration for the Lancer and Ace paperbacks, he showed the same battle, but Frank Frazetta did not give us a Frost Giant's daughter in that composition, which I always felt was kind of a shame. But back to the Barry Smith cover here now, and as great as this artwork is, I think, I'm still going to pick it apart a little bit here just because I'm an old art director and I can't help it. But really there's not much wrong with it, except that now we are introducing color into the story. And this is a very minor nit to pick, I admit this, but we are told by Howard in his story that the frost giant's daughter has skin of ivory and it's as white as the snow itself. And here, the colorist on this cover has given us a fairly healthy pink frost giant's daughter, and so that to me is incorrect. And like I've said in other videos before, I always like to look in artwork that is meant to depict the story itself. How close does it come to the actual details that the author intended us to visualize when we were reading it? And this is, like I say, this is a small thing. Nobody else but somebody like me would even care, but I just have to point it out. And then not to mention that the gossamer veil, which is supposed to be just a very sheer transparent wisp of a thing, is a bright pink here. And so that seems wrong, although I guess technically it's not. I don't know if the story, Howard's story, actually mentioned the color of the veil, but you get the idea from reading it that it's just this sheer, completely transparent, diaphanous slip of a thing. And then the only other thing that really is kind of sticking in my craw a little bit, although again it's very minor, and that is that the frost giant that is tumbling over here with the sword should not have a sword. Both of the brothers were fighting with axes. Again, just a little thing. You probably don't care, but Howard said 2 axes, and Barry Smith gives us an axe and a sword. So just saying. And then you will remember that when we were talking about the black and white opening page, that really nice double splash spread that Smith gave us for the black and white Savage Tales, we can't really do that in the color comic. Color comic has to start with an opening single page splash panel and then move on from there. Now, I didn't mention this on the other one, but I had wondered when I first saw that black and white spread that Barry Smith laid that out. I really like the composition, and it would have been a shame to do this, but you could have theoretically just chopped that double spread splash panel in 2 and just used the right half of that artwork as a splash page for an edited comic book version. Fortunately, they didn't do that, and fortunately, Barry Smith gave us more artwork. He gave us a new first page splash panel. And again, I think we benefit from the extra year of professional growth that Smith has developed his style further. The drawing itself is pretty dramatic. You see strewn bodies and then that one shield stabbed in the foreground there. If you look carefully in the background, on the horizon of the snow, before we see the blue mountains in the background, we see Heimdall and Conan having their final battle there. And I really like the way that it is downplayed, that it's way off in the distance, because we don't want to steal the thunder of showing them up close, because that's going to happen in the next panel. You'll see what I mean. But in just some experimental uses of colors and inks in this page, Barry Smith gave us a very fine outline of these mountains way in the distance, and then just the colorist just painted it completely with blue without all outlines. We get those really nice highlights just knocked out of the solid cyan color in the 4-color process for the comic book. Very nice. And then Barry Smith, as I recall, once he was really getting his groove on back in those days, maybe a year or so later after this, and he was really doing some really nice time-consuming and painstaking detail in his drawings, just drawing every little single strand of hair, those kinds of things. He was falling into kind of an Art Nouveau style that he was picking up as an influence and integrating that into his Conan illustrations that were just fantastic. And I don't think we're seeing too much of that yet, but now that we have a title page here, and we see that he's added in the Frost Giant's daughter. He's got those Art Nouveau swirls behind it. I don't think the coloring is very good here because it's kind of hard to read with the green swirls behind the red type. In graphic design, that's usually not a good thing to put red type on top of green background, because in black and white, or if you're colorblind, those two colors are identical. So but the style of it is has a nice Conan-esque feel now that is we're seeing from Barry Smith for one of the first times. And now we move to the first beat of the story here. And again, this is a reprint of the artwork from the black and white magazine, but with the addition of color. And it works pretty well, I think. And now here you can see where they could have just taken the right half of this spread and used that as the opening splash page for the comic book. But again, fortunately, they didn't do that. I think all they would have had to have done would just to have moved that one word snipe from the left page to the right, and that would have been it. In the black and white, the little, what we see here is a yellow scroll behind Conan now has the credits like you usually see at the beginning of a comic book story from Marvel, because we have the actual title, The Frost Giant's Daughter, which used to live in this scroll. Now that's on the brand new opening splash page that we just looked at. Now, what I wanted to do for this last section of the video here, the comparison, I wanted to do side by side of the black and white art next to the color art in scale with each other, just so you can really see the differences and how things changed. I didn't do that with the first double spread there because it was just too big. It wanted the whole screen to really show itself off. But from here on out, for the next however many beats we've got left now, six more, I guess, I'm going to show the original black and white on the left, and then on the right will be the color comic book version in the scale to each other, so you can see how much larger one is than the other, and then the complications of some of those Zipatone screens that were used when a different scale screen is applying color on top of it. So we'll start off with, I guess, the second beat of the story with the appearance of the Frost Giant's daughter. And I think this is also a successful retouching job here. We still get the idea that Atali has nothing covering her at all except for her flimsy little gossamer veil. And we even see little wisps of flesh color showing through. So that's a nice way of covering things up and yet still suggesting how transparent it really is. The one nitpick that I've got for this one is the same one as on the cover, if you even care anymore. But Howard tells us that when Conan first sees the Frost Giant's daughter, he immediately mistakes her for one of the Veneer, the red-headed tribe that he's fighting against, and therefore she must be an enemy. So he does not want to trust her right away until on second look he realizes that as the light catches it, her hair is actually a beautiful combination of the red hair from the Veneer and the golden blonde hair of the Aesir, which are his allies. So the combination fools him. And I think if this was really what he saw, this looks more like kind of a strawberry blonde or something. If I was Conan, I wouldn't have mistaken her for a redhead. I would have thought she's more of a blonde and probably more of an ally than an enemy. So probably doesn't matter to anybody else. It's not calling that out specifically in the Roy Thomas script in the comic book here. I'm just saying. But one of the real problems here, a production problem, is that Zipatone halftone screen that Barry Smith applied by hand onto the background. It looks pretty good in the black and white version. The pages were larger and the paper was of a better quality stock. In the cheaper, pulpier stock that were used in comic books, the paper was a lot more absorbent, so that the smaller and tighter the line screen is for halftone dots, they start to get absorbed into the paper and spread into one another and kind of clog up on the press, so they get kind of muddy. And you can see that happening here, especially since they're not only just printing it at a smaller size on a cheaper paper, but they're also painting a light color on top of it, which is at a different scale of a line screen, and so kind of mucks it up even a little more. They didn't bother to go in and remove the halftone screen when they reshot the artwork for the color comic, unfortunately. So we're going to have some appearances of this kind of problem in other panels as well. And we'll even see it in this next comparison here of the third beat of the story, the chase. It's not too bad here, but I think you can see that if there hadn't been that gray tone behind the new blue wash of color in the mountain behind them here, it wouldn't be as dingy or as splotchy. But probably more important than that is you can see how the drawing itself was altered other than the coloring here. And that is just mostly in the gossamer veil that is either covering or not covering parts of Atali that the comics code might not appreciate so much as the Curtis version. And then that leads us straight into the ambush, the next beat of the story here. We'll compare those two drawings, one with the colorized version, and you can really start to see the splotchiness here when they're trying to color on top of even more tints and shades and different scales of those Zipatone screens. Painting another color on top of the two sides of that crevasse there in this drawing, as light as it might be, just reducing it down to comic book scale and also on the cheaper paper really muddies those up. It looks almost black here, whereas at least in the black and white version, it's just a nice, rich, dark gray. We do have the benefit, though, of getting to add color to the sky, the kind of aurora borealis effect that Conan is still seeing from getting clonked on the head, either that or that's just the nature of this other reality that maybe he's finding himself in. Don't know. But the color does work nicely in this case. And so now here's where Atali runs away, leading us into the next beat of the story here, where she's trying to get away from Conan now that she doesn't have her brothers to protect her anymore. And just more examples of the same kind of thing of those Zipatone screens that were added. One of those patterns that you could get, or several of those patterns, it's just of different weights and tones, was a gradient. And so in the very first panel, black and white, you can see that Smith was using a gradient of a darker gray at the top to a lighter gray towards the snow, about 2/3 down. And then what happens to that when you apply color to it, reduce it down, print it on cheaper paper, it's starting to plug up there at the top. Not too bad, but you can see it. And then another example in the second frame on each side, rather than the halftone screen, we're seeing Smith is using that other kind of grainy pattern overlay on there. Other than that, really, the main difference here is how much of a gossamer veil do we see in one or the other. But we're getting close to the end here now, and so I kind of lost count of what beat we're on. But we'll just say this is the penultimate beat, and this is when Njord's troops have found Conan in the snow. Not really much to say about this comparison. I'm just including it here because I'm just trying to match what we've talked about before. And also, I thought it might help to keep this video from running too short. So, all right, so now the final beat here, we'll take a look at another comparison. And again, there's not really much to say here. We don't have the problem with the production of the halftone screens or anything like that, of miscoloring anything. I guess we can believe that the little wisp of a veil that Conan still grasps in his left hand, which is correct according to Howard's story. Just a nice ending to the story. And there you have it, folks. We made it. You made it. Congratulations. And now, since you did make it this far through the video, I'm going to assume that you must be either a big Conan fan or Robert E. Howard fan, Frost Giant's daughter fan, or in this particular case, probably more than anything else, a Barry Windsor-Smith fan. So since you have stuck through it this far, I just want to let you know, if you don't already, that there have been some other notable booktubers that have covered this very same adaptation for Marvel Comics and Savage Tales. And I'll leave links to their channels down below. There's three in particular. Michael K. Vaughan last year during Cimmerian September did an Epic Comic Book Wednesday installment where he talked about this artwork and this adaptation. And then, of course, that means that Steve Donahue on his channel had to do a response video, and he did his own Epic Comic Book Wednesday episode on the same subject, same topic, same artwork, and all that. And then just a couple of weeks ago, Grammaticus Books did a very nice video on this artwork too. And they, all three of them, go through the whole story and give you their reactions to the story and the artwork and all that in their own imitable style. And so you ought to check them out. And so we'll just wrap it up with that. That part 2 is done now. Next Friday, if I can manage it, and if you have the patience for it, we'll get part 3 up. And in that one, we'll move on to the eventual publication of Robert E. Howard's original manuscript in print form. That'll be in 1976. and then move on to the next adaptation in comic book form, that from Dark Horse Comics, and then we'll move on from there. So these are a lot of fun to do. Hope to see you back here again next week, and let me know in the comments if you're enjoying it, and why you're enjoying it, and what brought you here. Was it Barry Windsor-Smith? Was it Conan himself? Was it Robert E. Howard? Was it me? It was probably me. All right, so in the meantime, we'll chat again later, and thanks for watching.